Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you.
How are you this morning, Dr. Paul?
Doing very well,
Good.
and it's nice to be here today and get our new week started off. It's sad that we have to bring up the subject of a terrible tragedy, in Pittsburgh, which has been well covered in the news, but it has to be disturbing to 99.5% of everybody, hopefully in the world, but certainly I think with Americans. But the sad part about it is sometimes people use events like this for political reasons on both sides, and that is discouraging. Especially, it would bother us probably a little bit more because we don't declare ourselves Republicans or Democrats, and we're really independent. So when they politicize it, they mean, well, there's only two political parties. I'm always arguing that they wish they'd get a second one sometime. But anyway, it's a real tragedy, and I certainly perked up when I heard it in Pittsburgh because, as many people know, I was born and raised in Pittsburgh. I left Pittsburgh, for the military, but I went back to finish up my OBGYN residency, which is not very far from Squirrel Hill, which is where this occurred. And the environment there was, at the McGee Hospital was very Jewish because more than half of our residents were Jewish, people who came from Squirrel Hill. So I know the area quite well, and there's been, a little bit of discussion that the community there that was hit happened to be, pretty conservative, sound people, very outreaching, and really wanted to reach outside their community. And I found that to be the case in the people that I knew from there. But it's a rat race now to find out who did what and who to be blamed, and there's a lot of things going on, but the approach that we want to talk about is how it's covered. What can you say, and will there be any censorship? And we already have heard now that there's censorship going on if depending on how you report things and say things or who you're going to blame. There's a lot of trouble in our country today, and a lot of hate, a lot of argument, and of course there's been, even from our side, a lot of challenge with mainstream media. That's why we're doing what we're doing, because we don't get on national television. So we thought we were the alternative, but now there's the fact that the alternative media, the massive amount of reporting that goes out on the internet, if it's challenging, even if it's 100% truthful, if it's challenging to the establishment, the government establishment or the media establishment, all of a sudden individuals who are in this alternative media trying to get the truth out become the enemy. And right now, even before this event, it's ongoing. There's a lot of dissension and a lot of friction, and it brings up me thinking about the individuals who reported on the fourth turning, that there are major events every 80 to 100 years, big events. And I sort of lean toward accepting that theory because I've been talking for a good many months now about the system we have today is running out of steam. We're running out of money. The foreign policy is a failure. The economic policy has nothing to do with free markets and sound money, and it's coming to an end. And because of that, there's a lot of people angling on who's going to control things, and there's a lot of vitriol, a lot of argument, and just people say, well, the government is failing, we need more cooperation, and I don't think that's the case. There's been way too much cooperation among the groups that promoted this scandalous system that we have today, but I think they're looking all in the wrong place, and because right now it's control of what people think and do and what you can say. And the political correctness has gone nuts. Our universities are out of control. Cultural Marxism is a mess. The finances are bad, and yet so many people get distracted, from this event. They're not going to talk about this. They're just talk about, how can I get you? And just look at what happened on that appointment for Kavanaugh. I was disappointed with that whole thing, but not because of the nonsense that went on. I didn't like the idea that nobody brought up the fact that Kavanaugh wasn't all that good on privacy and civil liberties. So it is a mess, and I think that's what's going on here. But what I'd like to do is try to sort it out. What can you say or can't you say, and what's the government's role? And when a private company penalizes somebody, is that strictly a private company, or is that the government indirectly really cracking down on free speech? And I can't help but think that the collusion of the social media and government is very, very strong and makes our job very difficult.
Yeah, and as terrible as the tragedy was over the weekend, and even the week before with these fake bombings, these bombs being sent, as horrible as the tragedy over the weekend was, it seems very unseemly that so many differing political groups, they want to rush to take advantage of it. It's almost, ambulance chasing or something, and they're rushing to take advantage of it because the people who want to shut down our ability to express ourselves politically, shut down free speech, they love things like this. Not that they love people being killed, but they love the opportunity to make the case for this. And that's one of the things that we noticed is the incredible beat up on Gab.com. And Gab is kind of a clone of Twitter. And Twitter, as we know and we've discussed, they can ban you at the drop of a hat for things you can't even figure out what. And Gab has advertised itself as relatively more free, pro-free speech explicitly. They don't allow violence or terrorism. And they did indeed ban this guy's account, Robert Bowers, when they found out, and they sent all the info to the police. But that didn't stop the media who want to shut down any site that says pro-free speech. The New York Times calls it, quote, an extremist-friendly site, because this guy posted there. Well, he also had accounts on Twitter and Facebook, but no one's talking about that. Because remember, Twitter and Facebook ran up to Capitol Hill. What can we do for you? What can we do for you? Just tell us, ban some people, that's great. And this nexus between government and so-called social media is becoming much more pronounced and unholy. So what happened to Gab, the pro-free speech website, Twitter? They came under attack, extremist-friendly. Literally within minutes, PayPal said, nope, we're not going to do business with you. GoDaddy, you're off of our site. You can't have your site. Medium.com kicked out their account. Stripe, which is a payment processing system, you're out. You're out of here. Hosting provider Joyland kicked them out. Essentially destroying everything about the business simply because they had a crazy person on there saying horrible things.
And that's a far cry from what it was like in the old days when if you owned a newspaper, you had editorial power to put in there and news, whatever you wanted to do because you were the owner and you could include or exclude. But this is much more complicated. And for me, and I'm sure for others, to sort it out, if you're really determined to protect civil liberties, you want private people to be able to discriminate and pick, what you can do. But this is not. This is government. This is a mixture. This social media is part of it. It's a corporatism that exists. But there was one article that we have on the RPI website, and that is there is no right to you don't have a right to use social media. You can't assume that. So that's the extreme of it. We're complaining about how it's controlled, but now somebody comes down and says, you don't have a right to do it. So therefore, what they're doing is saying we have a right to regulate it, and that is Jamie Fly. Yeah. And I think he was in the Bush administration or something, not exactly a civil libertarian.
No, this is it. I mean, this is what we've been trying for a few weeks now to understand the nexus between government, the revolving door of government officials into these social media companies and back into government, and the role they play in restricting speech that is anti-government speech. We talked about the Facebook crackdown on websites like Cop Block or Free Thought Project that challenged the mainstream narrative. So you have someone like Jamie Fly, and we have Kurt Nimmo, we have a piece on our site, but also he was writing about this Max Blumenthal article that was really good, a profile. He's a hardcore neocon. He's a cheerleader for the purge of anti-establishment views from the internet. He says everyone shouldn't be allowed to go on the internet, shouldn't be allowed to have an account. And he bragged at a recent conference about these bannings of people from Twitter and Facebook and said there's going to be a lot more, and he's happy about it. Well, who is he? Is he just some guy? No. He's a senior fellow at the German Marshall Fund, which is funded by NATO and the U.S. government. So by really, in essence, a U.S. government-funded person. He was a mid-level Bush administration official in the National Security Council and the DOD. Then he went on to work for Bill Kristol at the Foreign Policy Initiative, a hardcore neocon think tank. And then he went to work for Marco Rubio. So this is someone who's mixed in with the government. When he's at the German Marshall Fund now. Well, what do? They started the Alliance for Securing Democracy, and that's the group that created the Hamilton 68, searching for bots everywhere. Everyone's a bot. Well, who's behind that? Mike Chertoff, remember him? David Kramer, head of the McCain Institute, not the Ron Paul Institute, the McCain Institute, the polar opposite. Bill Kristol, Mike Morrell, he's the guy who said that Trump is Putin's agent. Former acting director of the CIA. John Podesta is on this. So this is who this guy works for when he's not working for the government directly, and he's saying we need more censorship. And he's just one of many.
There's an article on Lou Rockwell's site this morning that I thought was valuable, and the title was More Independent Media to be Shut Down Prior to 2020 U.S. Presidential Election. And this whole thing really broke loose in 2016, because that's when it became appropriate in many ways to talk about the fake media.
Yeah.
I mean, it drove them nuts to call it fake, but it is not reliable media, and which a lot of people had come to this conclusion. Trump didn't invent, the media and lose their credibility, but he certainly pointed it out. So this article that Lou has here, Rob will read the first sentence here. If you haven't already heard, Facebook has completely shut down hundreds, if not thousands, of independent media pages over the past year, and they expect to become more aggressive, for the next election. And just think of the mess that came out of the last election. But once again, I think it's back to this situation that socially and economically and foreign policy, it's unworkable, it's failing, and people are just struggling to blame each other and have control. But the one thing that seems to be not used very often is just the plain truth. And I would have to say that the people who have challenged, the ordinary media early on, I think they were on the side of trying to promote it. But right now, there's so much demagoguing going on, and I have so little trust in the fact that there's really competition in Washington where, the two parties might sort it out. That isn't it. I think it's the people who want the truth versus those individuals in government. And fortunately, the one thing on our side there is the people who are disgusted with this are disgusted with the government per se. But I think where we come up short is, what are you going to do about it? Yeah. What are you going to replace it with? What is necessary? And if there is this major event occurring where things are going to change totally, is it going to be very favorable like our revolution, which was, the overthrow of a totalitarian government? Or would it be the overthrow of the remnant of that system under the Woodrow Wilson era and the introduction of all the nonsense, which is just built and grown? We use Woodrow Wilson, but Teddy Roosevelt was involved, and it was creeping along. And then certainly, economically, an FDR, this whole buildup of intervention and control. And then when the failure comes on, the only thing they can think of is not move off on the control. It's more and more regulations, more spending, more militarism, more empire, and it's going to solve the problem. And I think that's completely wrong way to go, and we have to sort it out and let people know that there's some fundamental understanding of what rights are all about, and that you can't make rights collective and just talk about by groups. You have to get back to the fundamentals, and I believe the founders were very understanding of natural rights. They belong to individuals and not very special interest groups.
And this unseemly taking advantage of a tragedy like this to push an agenda of restricting political speech that you disagree with, really it operates according to a false logic as well, if you think about it. Because does anyone really think this guy Robert Bowers, this hate-filled lunatic who shot these people. Does anyone think that if he had only been banned by Gab, a month earlier, he would have said, you know what, maybe my ideas really are stupid. I've been banned by Gab. I better reform myself and go home. That's the worst thing you want in a way, because it would almost be better, I think it would be better for having someone out there saying his ideas, because then he gets shot down.
Would this fit into this saying, don't ever let an emergency or crisis go to waste?
They love it. They love it.
And they do, and certainly the case.
And that's exactly what they're doing. But I would actually just close this little chapter by reading a quote from Ed Snowden, which was, I think it was in that Lou Rockwell article that you mentioned earlier, because I think this really, as usual, he captures it perfectly. He said, the problem of fake news isn't solved by hoping for a referee, but rather because we as citizens, we as users of these services help each other. We talk and we share and we point out what is fake. We point out what is true. The answer to bad speech is not censorship. The answer to bad speech is more speech. We have to exercise and spread the idea that critical thinking matters now more than ever, given the fact that lies seem to be getting more popular.
Boy, I think that is a wonderful statement. And I think as depressing as this can be at times, that how do we combat this? We don't not only have to combat the government censorship and the control, but also this collusion of big government and social media and the alternative media. Regular media is fake news, and the alternative media is getting to the point where it's nothing more than corporatism, and they regulate all that we do. So this is something that can be discouraging. I happen to believe, though, and at least maybe I'm overly naive, but I'm very hopeful that the technology which is being used against us right now, that they can turn a switch and turn somebody off and throw them off all the outlets, proving that they're not really independent, but they're all, it's almost like a mob psychology that they use. But the alternative has to be reached. In the old days, they did it one-on-one and pamphleteering. I still think it has to be done one-on-one. I still think that there's still going to be email lists available. And I still think there's going to be a lot of people who know what truth is all about. I was quite pleased, what happened during the presidential campaigns that I was involved, because we would reach a lot of people, and they were enthusiastic, and it wasn't like the message of liberty was strange. It was received and welcome. There's no reason for us to think that that is not possible, and that we do, though, have a job of trying to figure out how we can use the media. But maybe it's just smaller groups. Maybe it's just people spreading information, 100 or 200 or 300 at a time. But it is painful when you work up a business, you become dependent on it, and you have a lot of investment, and they can, with a stroke of a pen, in combination with government agents and government ex-agents, that all of a sudden they close you down and throw you out because you use the wrong words, and they can penalize you. That is a really tough thing. But we have to have individuals who will know how to change this. I don't think that modification of what we have now, of all of a sudden that we will lecture Facebook and Google, and all of a sudden they'll say, oh yeah, I think you guys are right. I think we should have a libertarian approach, and if you follow the rules, everything is okay, but we will recognize freedom of speech. But of course, I have said, and I said it in my final speech on the House floor, that the most important thing that we can have to protect our liberties is our First Amendment. We have to have the right to speak out, and we have to have it. And it isn't so that we can speak out and talk about social things and family things and weather. It has to be where we can speak out and criticize our government and be able to say controversial things. And even if they're marginal, if they're not calling for violence, they should be permissible. But I see the combination of big corporations and big government as the real threat to our liberty at this time. So if we know who the enemy is and we know what the answers are, I think we just need to get to work and make sure our message is heard. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.